Chapter 21. System Shop 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Finally. Zhang Wei let out a long, exasperated sigh as he stepped into his room, closing the door behind him. He had been waiting for this moment for hours. A chance to be alone with his thoughts and explore the mysteries of the system without interruption. As he turned around, he caught sight of Feng Xinyue pouting in the corner, her arms crossed stubbornly. He had left her in Yulei's care, but the little Nizi had been unwilling to leave his side. Go on now, he said firmly, turning to face her. I'll see you in the morning. Feng Xinyue's pout deepened, but a stern glare from him quickly put her in her place. With a huff, she reluctantly made her way out of the room, leaving Zhang Wei alone at last. I must teach her a lesson in the future. Zhang Wei thought to himself, feeling that Feng Xinyue needed some discipline. However, he knew that if the Sky God learned about his plans for his daughter, he might personally descend to the lower world. Zhang Wei had learned about the Sky God through the system. He was the ruler of the higher plane and not someone to be trifled with. Nonetheless, Zhang Wei couldn't help but feel that Feng Xinyue needed to be put in her place. He made a mental note to come up with a plan that wouldn't attract the Sky God's attention. Afterwards, Zhang Wei took a deep breath, relishing the silence that filled the room. The day had been long and arduous, but he had persevered. Now, he could finally focus on the task at hand. Exploring the depths of the system and unlocking its secrets. Soon, a interfaced opener in front of him. =======villain system. User status. View your current level, experience points, and abilities. System shop. Purchase powerful artifacts, potions, and equipment to aid you on your quest for dominance. Quest log. View available quests and their rewards. Complete them to earn experience points and unlock new abilities. Inventory. Can be used to store non-living items. Update the system to access more options. Points needed for update. 100k villain points. Villain points available. 10,000 ============. As Zhang Wei gazed at the menu, he felt a thrill of excitement course through him. The possibilities were endless. With enough villain points, he could unlock a whole new world of power and prestige. He could purchase the most powerful artifacts, join a faction, and rise through the ranks to become the most feared villain in the world. But first, he needed to earn more villain points. The meager 10k he had accumulated so far were nothing compared to the 100k needed for an update. Zhang Wei's eyes lingered on the system shop, imagining all of the powerful weapons and potions he could purchase with enough villain points. He could already feel the rush of power surging through his veins. But first, he needed to view his own status. Status. Name. Zhang Wei. Age. 25. Body rank. Mortal body cultivation level. None bloodline. None spirit beast. None cultivation talent. Heavenly talent spiritual root rank. Heavenly thunder root, heaven. Defying spiritual root, ============A/N. For detailed ranks check auxiliary chapters. Zhang Wei's eyes widened in disbelief as he realized the magnitude of his talent. Heavenly talent, he muttered to himself, stunned by the realization. The system had explained that only the Sky God was known to be alive with this type of talent. Could this mean that he had the potential to reach the heavens? The system interrupted his thoughts. Host, the Sky God only possessed the Golden Sun root, which is a divine rank spiritual root. However, you have the Heavenly Thunder root, which is one rank higher. Zhang Wei was taken aback by this revelation. Am I the only person alive to possess the Heavenly Spiritual root then? The system replied, no, host. In the past, that would have been the case. However, the Celestial Princess was born with the Celestial Phoenix root, which is the same rank as yours. However, she only has divine rank cultivation, or else she would have overshadowed you. Zhang Wei shrugged off the system's words. It doesn't matter if she surpasses me in talent. She will be living under me from now on, he said confidently. He didn't fear Feng Xingyue, she was basically his devout follower now. Until she regained her memories, she was harmless to him. System. Host, are you serious about taking her as your woman? Zhang Wei raised his eyebrows, why are you overreacting? The whole divine realm will come to cut you into pieces if they hear about the host's audacious remarks. But is that the only reason? Zhang Wei spoke with suspicion. The system refused to divulge any further information, but Zhang Wei knew there was more to his talent than just her strength, or else the system wouldn't be overreacting to this extent. Regardless, he felt suspicious about his extraordinary talent. System, why do I have this otherworldly talent? He asked. Zhang Wei was growing increasingly frustrated as he waited for a response from the system. 2 minutes of complete silence passed before a defeated sigh finally echoed in his mind. Everything comes with a price, host. If you possess such talents, you will also face equivalent tribulation in the future. That doesn't answer my question, retorted Zhang Wei, feeling more agitated than ever. Host, please understand that the system is bound by certain rules and limitations. We cannot reveal everything about the world to you. Zhang Wei's expression softened slightly as he heard the system's explanation. He knew the system won't tell him about many things, but Zhang Wei only wanted to try his luck. He couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity and suspicion. He made a mental note to extract every bit of information he could from the system in the future. As his mind wandered, he realized he had almost forgotten the reason he had started this conversation with the system. The various ranks of cultivation talent in this world suddenly flashed through his mind, and he focused his attention back on the present. So, the cultivation talent in this world is divided into various ranks. Heavenly talent. The rarest and most powerful talent, possessed by only a handful of individuals in the entire history of universe. Those with this talent are considered to be blessed by the heavens and have unparalleled potential for cultivation. They are often sought after as disciples by the most powerful sects and clans. Divine talent. A powerful talent that allows for rapid progress in cultivation and mastery of techniques. Those with this talent are highly respected and often occupy important positions in their sects or clans. Supreme talent. A strong talent that allows for steady progress in cultivation and mastery of advanced techniques. Those with this talent are respected for their skill and often lead missions or expeditions. Elite talent. A natural talent that allows for steady progress in cultivation and mastery of intermediate techniques. Those with this talent are respected for their skill and often act as mentors to younger cultivators. Average talent. A common talent that allows for slow but steady progress in cultivation and mastery of basic techniques. Those with this talent often need to work harder than others to achieve success. Mediocre talent. A weak talent that makes cultivation difficult and progress slow. Those with this talent are often overlooked and may struggle to advance in the cultivation world. Poor talent. A very weak talent that makes cultivation almost impossible. Those with this talent are often considered to be hopeless cases and are rarely given the opportunity to train with reputable sects or clans. Mundane talent. No talent in cultivation. They are often referred to as commoners and are not taken seriously by the cultivation world. They are limited to the mundane and ordinary life. Then, comes the spiritual root, its hierarchy is as follows. Heaven, defying spiritual root. The rarest and most powerful spiritual root, allowing for incredible potential and rapid cultivation progress. Those with this spiritual root are considered to be destined for greatness. Divine spiritual root. A powerful spiritual root that grants exceptional talent and potential in cultivation. Those with this spiritual root are highly valued and often groomed for leadership positions. Superior spiritual root. A strong spiritual root that allows for steady progress in cultivation. Those with this spiritual root are respected and often given important roles in their sects or clans. Average spiritual root. A common spiritual root that allows for slow but steady progress in cultivation. Those with this spiritual root are often overlooked and have to work harder to achieve success. Inferior spiritual root. A weak spiritual root that makes cultivation difficult and progress slow. Those with this spiritual root are often looked down upon and may struggle to find success in the cultivation world. Suddenly, Zhang Wei knitted his eyebrows as he noticed something unpleasant. "Why are so many things locked in the system shop?" he asked. "The host needs to level up his cultivation to unlock them." Zhang Wei fell silent. He wanted to scold the system, but he restrained himself. "Hey, system, do you have a will of your own?" he asked. "Yes, host." "But why do you ask?" "So, are you partial towards good or evil?" he inquired. "No, host. The system doesn't care about it either way. The more evil people there are in the world, the more it will lead to the generation of people with heroic hearts." Zhang Wei nodded in agreement, satisfied with the system's response. The words of the system were too profound for the average person to fully comprehend. However, they displayed the system's profound knowledge of universal balance. Simply put, the more evil that exists in the world, the more heroes will rise to counter it. One cannot exist without the other. The spirit of a hero is only ignited when there is a demon king to defeat. How can an 18-year-old virgin beta transform into a hero if there is no cause to fight? Wouldn't he just remain a beta until he experiences a setback that makes him question the current state of the world? This can be observed by how many NGO founders are individuals who have survived a calamity or terrorist attack. Thus, the system did not care how evil Zhang Wei acted, as the world would balance itself out in the end. "So why did you give me a task in the beginning?" asked Zhang Wei, having some guesses about it. The task was assigned to the host to help understand the host's heart and mind properly, and thus calibrate the system according to the host's needs. If the host's heart was kinder, then the quest log would have been designated differently than it is now. Zhang Wei nodded, realizing that his guess wasn't far off. "So why are the items locked in the system? I clearly got the villain system. When did villains start to have limitations?" The system felt that Zhang Wei had a point this time and had to bow to its host's wits. "The system has been recalibrated, host. Now all the items in the shop are open, but the host has to pay the price to obtain them as usual, which is in villain points. Villain points can be earned by doing actions that are considered to be evil, or by completing quests." Zhang Wei smiled with satisfaction, as he never thought the system would actually consider his request. "What about the bloodlines and spirit beast section?" "It isn't here. Some sections of the system will be unlocked only after it is updated to the next level. The host should prove their worth as a villain by updating the system using villain points." Zhang Wei sighed, realizing that this was the maximum benefit he could extract from the system for now. Zhang Wei was not just greedy, but he was a shrewd negotiator. He knew that every interaction with the system had the potential to change the dynamics of their relationship, and he didn't want to be caught off guard. He approached every request with caution and deliberation, weighing the risks and rewards of each decision. Despite his desire to get as many benefits as possible from the system, he never acted carelessly or impulsively. He knew that the system was not just a tool, but a complex entity that had its own motives and desires. He had already seen glimpses of the system's power and intelligence, and he suspected that there was much more to it than he initially thought. The system already has its own will, what is stopping it from having a whole consciousness, as Zhang Wei estimated. Zhang Wei realized that the system was also dependent on him to a certain degree, as till now the system never threatened him and was trying to accommodate to his requests and nagging. But he knew that he could not treat the system as a mere vending machine, dispensing items and powers at his whim. Instead, he had to approach it as a partner in a complex relationship, with both parties needing each other to achieve their goals. Even though Zhang Wei was wary of the system's potential hidden motives, he was also curious about what it might need from him in the future. He had a nagging feeling that the system was keeping some of its capabilities and features hidden from him, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. He knew that he had to stay alert from it, at the same time extract as much benefits as possible. Chapter 22. System Shop 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Afterwards, Zhang Wei got a short explanation in the cultivation realms, that can be achieved by in the lower world. The system skipped the explanation for divine realm, for now, citing the cliché reasons, that the host strength is too low for it. The cultivation realm, in the lower world can be broadly classified into 10 realms. First, Qi Gathering Realm. Second, Foundation Establishment Realm. Third, Core Formation Realm. Fourth, Soul Warming Realm. Fifth, Spirit Tempering Realm. Sixth, Martial Ancestor Realm. Seventh, Heaven's Mandate Realm. 8. Earthly Immortal Realm. 9th, Heavenly Immortal Realm. 10th, Divine Immortal Realm. All the realms are further classified as initial, intermediate, advanced and peak. In addition, there is a classification for artifacts, techniques and pill available in the system shop. System shop. 1. Techniques 2. Artifacts 3. Pills 4. Bodies After going through all of them, Zhang Wei found that the body was the costliest option among them all. He couldn't help but feel apprehensive about it. However, upon remembering that even a soul-warming cultivator like Leng Mei only possessed a tempered body, he thought that cultivating a body was much harder. The system reassured him that he didn't need to cultivate his body, as upon purchase it would be directly integrated with his own, enhancing his overall strength. Zhang Wei nodded at the explanation and decided to use his points to purchase a body for now. The system informed him that he didn't need to purchase a cultivation technique, as a technique of unknown grade that matched his spiritual root would be given as a free gift to him under the starter pack. As for the rest, Zhang Wei had no knowledge about the strange artifacts and pills in the shop. The descriptions could give him a vague idea about them, but that was all. Bodies. 1. Mortal body. 100 points description. The basic human body with no cultivation. 2. Tempered body. 500 points description. This is a body that has undergone tempering through physical training, martial arts, and other physical conditioning. It is stronger and more resilient than a normal mortal body, but still vulnerable to weapons and strong blows. 3. Steel body. 1000 points description. The body has been tempered to the point where it's as hard as steel. It can withstand even the strongest physical attacks and can also be used to channel qi more efficiently. 4. Gold body. 5000 points description. The body has been tempered to the point where it's as valuable as gold. It has a natural resistance to magic and can be used to channel qi to perform powerful spells. 5. Diamond body. 10,000 points description. This is a body that has been tempered to the point where it is as hard as diamond. It is nearly indestructible and can withstand almost any physical attack. 6. Supreme body. 20,000 points description. This is a body that has been tempered to the point where it is highly resistant to physical attacks and can withstand powerful blows from weapons or even other cultivators. Villain points. Available villain points. 10,000 description. Villain points can be used to purchase various items or abilities that are only available to villains. These can include powerful weapons, spells, or alchemy pills that can be used to further your goals as a villain. Use them wisely. Will the diamond body type help me defeat that lady police officer? Zhang Wei asked. Combined with the host's cultivation, the host should be able to surpass Leng Yen. However, the same cannot be said for Leng Mei. The host is advised to first achieve the core formation realm before attempting to take on opponents of higher stages. Zhang Wei nodded, realizing that he wasn't ready to take on Leng Mei just yet. However, he needed to gain control over Leng Yen as soon as possible. That woman could potentially cause him a lot of problems in the future. He realized that having someone who could help him evade law enforcement could be immensely beneficial. However, the problem was that he couldn't threaten Leng Yen. Even if he managed to tame her, she might rebel in the future if he didn't have any leverage over her. Suddenly, the system suggested 2 items from the shop. Techniques. Adept Grade 1. Incubus Aura. 2000 points. Description. Made any women the host has sex with unable to forget him, and make that women excessively obsessed with host. 2. Slave Seal. 2000 points. Description. The person would be unable to kill himself or resist any order of the host. Note. Can be only used on the person, if she willingly accepts the seal. Zhang Wei noticed the descriptions of both items and concluded that the slave seal was a better option. His reasoning was that the incubus aura would only turn the women into mindless slaves who would crave his attention and change their personalities completely. Moreover, how would he enjoy the satisfaction of teaching Leng Yen a lesson if she lost her hateful glare? He didn't want the women to fall in love with him, they could hate him all they wanted. Host, you are quite vicious, remarked the system, feeling disturbed by Zhang Wei's reasoning. Zhang Wei simply shrugged in response. He would rather bask in the hatred he could anticipate than the love that could disappear at any moment. What if the incubus aura stopped working all of a sudden? Wouldn't that be even worse? Zhang Wei had to consider a scenario where even the system would not be of use to him if he wanted to save himself from those celestials in the future. Would the slave seal work on Feng Xinyue? He asked, pondering whether he could enslave the celestial princess. No, her strength is too high for it to enslave her soul, the system replied. Zhang Wei agreed. He would be surprised if the slave seal actually worked on someone as powerful as Feng Xinyue. Diamond Body Type. Enhance your physical strength and defense with the unbreakable diamond body. Cost. 10,000 villain points. Available points. 10,000 to make a purchase, please select the desired item number and confirm with Y or N. Purchase confirmed. The diamond body type will be soon integrated with the user. Thank you for your patronage. Zhang Wei felt a rush of excitement as he heard the system's confirmation. He had spent all his villain points to acquire the legendary diamond body type, and he was eager to see what it could do for him. Suddenly, a brilliant light enveloped Zhang Wei's body, and he felt a surge of power coursing through his veins. It was like nothing he had ever experienced before. Ednel.co. As the light faded, Zhang Wei looked down at his hands in amazement. They were now covered in a shimmering, diamond-like material that gleamed in the light. He flexed his fingers experimentally, feeling the strength and power that now flowed through his body. He could feel his muscles bulging with newfound strength, and he knew that he was now capable of incredible feats of physical prowess. But there was more to the diamond body type than just strength and power. It was said to grant its user incredible durability and resilience, making them almost invulnerable to harm. To test this theory, Zhang Wei summoned a sharp knife from his drawer and slashed it across his forearm. But instead of blood and flesh, the knife simply bounced off his diamond skin, leaving behind only a small scratch. Zhang Wei couldn't help but grin in delight. With his new diamond body type, he was now a true force to be reckoned with. Though he felt weird, how was he supposed to go outside in this state? Suddenly, the diamond-like skin disappeared, replaced by his normal skin, which was much more juvenile and smoother than his original skin. So, the appearance and strength can be altered, thought Zhang Wei. He suddenly felt his stamina increase countless times, along with his strength. Host, the bodies are the most expensive, as it takes normal cultivators hundreds of years to strengthen their own bodies to level up. The host has basically used a shortcut. At the current stage, even without any cultivation, the host can crush a peak Foundation realm expert, the system explained. Zhang Wei's eyes glowed with a profound light. To think he could fight with cultivators even without using his cultivation, merely because of the diamond body. Wasn't it a cheat? Nevertheless, being a villain, he didn't pity the opponents who would face him in the future. What about the cultivation technique, system? Zhang Wei asked eagerly, his eyes shining with anticipation. Check your inventory, host, the system responded. Zhang Wei quickly opened his inventory, his heart racing with excitement. Inside, he found a supreme-grade marrow washing pill and an unnamed cultivation technique. His curiosity piqued, he asked, why doesn't it have a rank? Host, this technique was crafted by divine sages of the past, none of whom were ever able to master it. As a result, it remains unranked, the system explained. The elemental harmony technique uses the host's strength and amplifies it. As the host continues to grow and develop, the technique will continue to amplify the host's strength along with it. Zhang Wei couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement at the prospect of mastering such a powerful cultivation technique. Elemental Harmony Technique. The Elemental Harmony Technique is a cultivation method that focuses on balancing the 5 elements within the body: earth, water, fire, wood, and metal. By harmonizing these elements, practitioners can improve their physical and spiritual health, enhance their martial arts skills, and even gain access to elemental magic. The technique involves meditative exercises, breathing techniques, and visualization practices to cultivate and balance the elemental energies within the body. Supreme Grade Marrow Washing Pill. The Supreme Grade Marrow Washing Pill is a rare and highly sought-after pill in the world of cultivation. It is said to be able to cleanse the bones and marrow of impurities and enhance the body's innate abilities. Consuming the pill is a painful process that involves intense sweating and purging of impurities from the body. However, the rewards are said to be worth it, as the pill can greatly increase one's strength, agility, and longevity. It is only produced by the most skilled alchemists and is usually only available to the highest levels of cultivators. Chapter 23. Becoming a Cultivator. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Wei sat in his room, staring at the small vial in his hand. The Supreme Grade Marrow Washing Pill, one of the most sought-after pills in the cultivation world. It was said to be able to help wash away impurities from the body, purifying the bones and allowing for faster cultivation. The system suggested to first use the pill before stepping on the path of cultivation, that would greatly increase Zhang Wei's cultivation speed. Without hesitation, Zhang Wei summoned the pill from the inventory and stared at it in his palm. The pill was black in color and gave off a faint, pungent smell. He knew that he had to consume it quickly as the effects were time-sensitive. He quickly removed his clothes and moved towards the bathroom. The system had warned him that upon consuming the pill, his body would be covered in a black gooey substance, and suggested he move to the bathroom without any clothes. As he swallowed the pill, he felt a sudden surge of energy within his body, and then a strange sensation washed over him. His skin began to crawl as the black goo started to spread from within him, covering every inch of his body. It felt as if his entire body was being wrapped in a thick, viscous liquid. Arg! Zhang Wei gritted his teeth and held back a scream as the goo continued to spread, covering even his hair and fingernails. He could feel it penetrating every cell of his body, purifying and strengthening it. The sensation was overwhelming, and he had to focus all his willpower to endure it. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the goo receded, leaving Zhang Wei gasping for breath on the bathroom floor. He stood up shakily and looked at himself in the mirror. His skin was smoother, and his muscles looked more defined. He could feel the power coursing through his veins, and he knew that he was one step closer to his goals. Zhang Wei couldn't help but smile, feeling grateful for the system and the treasure it had bestowed upon him. Afterward, Zhang Wei cleaned the black goo on the floor and moved back to his room to practice elemental harmony technique. As per system, although many people in this world possess talent for cultivation, the energy of heaven and earth can't be harnessed without a proper cultivation technique. This is why in this world, cultivators were so few, the techniques were monopolized by selected number of large families and strong organizations. Zhang Wei carefully stepped over the wet and slippery tiles, the remnants of the black goo from his body still visible on the bathroom floor. With a sigh, he grabbed a towel and wiped his feet dry before wrapping the towel around his waist. He made his way back to his room, feeling a sense of excitement coursing through his veins. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. With the supreme-grade marrow washing pills effects coursing through his body, he was now ready to begin his journey to become a powerful cultivator. Sitting cross-legged on his bed, he closed his eyes and began to focus his mind. As he did, he felt the energy of the world around him start to flow into his body. It was a strange sensation, unlike anything he had ever experienced before. He could feel the power building within him, and he knew that he needed to focus his mind to control it. It was then that he began to chant the words of the elemental harmony technique that he had learned from the system. The words flowed effortlessly from his lips, as if they had been etched into his memory. He could feel the energy within him responding to the words, as if they were a key that unlocked a hidden power. As he continued to chant, he could feel his body changing. His muscles began to bulge and his skin started to glow with a faint light. The power within him was growing, and he could feel himself becoming stronger with each passing moment. As he opened his eyes, he couldn't help but smile, feeling the strange but yet profound power surging in his body. He paused for a moment, thinking about the words of the system about how the cultivation techniques were monopolized by the strong organizations in this lower world. It made him realize how strange he was to have the system and the starter pack. It gave him a chance to stand out and succeed where others couldn't. Zhang Wei did not believe as being lucky at all, but at the same time he won't try to control what he can't. Since the system was beyond his comprehension now, he decided to stop focusing his attention on its mysterious existence for now. With a newfound determination, he continued to practice the elemental harmony technique. As Zhang Wei delved deeper into the world of cultivation, he began to shed the societal shackles that once bound him. His mind and body were constantly evolving, adapting to the new energy that coursed through his veins. With this newfound power, he felt a sense of liberation that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He became more confident in his abilities, his actions less restrained and his decisions more impulsive. As he continued to cultivate, he began to realize that the path to true strength lay not only in physical prowess but also in a certain level of recklessness and disregard for societal norms. The energy of the heaven and earth continued to circulate around Zhang Wei's body, penetrating deep into his meridians and bones, slowly getting absorbed inside. He felt the energy flowing through his body like a mighty river, nourishing and strengthening his every fiber. Lost in the sensations, he didn't even realize that the night had already given way to the morning. Meanwhile, Yulei knocked on his door several times, but no one replied. Eventually, she grew impatient and left his breakfast in the refrigerator. Before leaving for work, she reminded Feng Xinyue to keep an eye on Zhang Wei and not cause any trouble. As time went on, Zhang Wei remained immersed in his cultivation, his body glowing with an otherworldly light. It wasn't until near noon that he finally opened his eyes, revealing a newfound clarity and depth. He couldn't help but mutter under his breath with a hint of excitement, initial stage of Qi gathering realm. Despite his lower cultivation level, the combination of his diamond body and the effects of the supreme marrow washing pill had already made him significantly more powerful than others at his cultivation realm. Afterwards, Zhang Wei finally opened the lock on his door and walked out into the living area. His gaze swept across the room and rested on Feng Xinyue's figure. Her eyes were locked onto him, as if she could sense his presence. He noticed that she was still wearing the same clothes from the day before. Despite Yu Lei's efforts to convince Feng Xinyue to change her clothes, the girl remained stubbornly adamant on keeping the same attire. In the end, Yu Lei had given up on persuading her, feeling helpless in the face of Feng Xinyue's unwavering determination. Facing the curious eyes of unsuspecting Feng Xinyue, Zhang Wei's smile grew vicious. Time to teach her a lesson. He muttered, moving closer to her. As Zhang Wei approached Feng Xinyue, she looked up at him with innocent curiosity, not suspecting anything malicious behind his smile. With a devious glint in his eyes, Zhang Wei silently relished in the thought of teaching her a lesson for yesterday's torture. He stood over her, his shadow looming large over her small frame. Feng Xinyue's eyes widened in surprise as Zhang Wei reached out and grabbed her dress near the shoulders, pulling her up to his level. She tried to struggle but found herself unable to break free from his grasp. Zhang Wei sneered, his grip tightening. "Let me show you what happens to those who cross me." Feng Xinyue's eyes widened in fear as she realized the seriousness of the situation. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as Zhang Wei's smile turned more and more menacing. She knew that she was in trouble, but she couldn't fathom what he had in mind for her. "Brother," she asked tentatively, her voice shaking with apprehension and worry. However, Zhang Wei was hell-bent on teaching her a lesson today, and he was not about to let her off the hook so easily. He approached her slowly, his eyes gleaming with a cold, cruel light. "You need to learn some respect," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "And I'm going to teach it to you, whether you like it or not." Feng Xinyue tried to back away, but he caught her by the arm and pulled her back down onto the sofa. She could feel her heart racing in her chest as he loomed over her, his expression dark and forbidding. As she lay there, trembling with fear, her eyes were drawn to the television. The news was on, and she watched in horror as a report came in about a new serial killer who was roaming the city, leaving a trail of death and destruction in his wake. The thought of this madman out there, lurking in the shadows, only added to her terror, and she could feel her body shaking with fear. Chapter 24. Zhang Wei Bullying Kids. 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Wei's eyes turned sharp as he slowly crept his hand above Feng Xinyue's ethereal white dress, ready to tear it apart completely. He had already devised a plan to handle things with Yu Lei afterwards. Since Feng Xinyue's powers were restricted in this world, this might be the perfect opportunity to tame her. The Sky God was not to be feared, as there were no communication devices on her body, at least that's what the system had told him. Zhang Wei pulled his hands with all his might, trying to tear her clothes at once, but to his surprise, nothing happened. Not even a scratch appeared on the fabric. "What the hell? Is it made of steel?" he muttered. He tried once again, channeling his chi through his hands to strengthen them, but the result was the same. "Host, you had better give up. Her dress is made of special fibers enhanced by layers of techniques. Unless she wants to take it off herself, it would be impossible for you to undress her," the system informed Zhang Wei. Zhang Wei closed his eyes in deep thought. "If you already knew that, why didn't you tell me?" he questioned. "Host doesn't ask." "How can the system tell?" the system retorted, leaving Zhang Wei speechless. He sighed, realizing that in matters concerning Feng Xinyue, the system would offer little to no help. He then browsed through the system shop in search of an item that could undress her, but he was disappointed to find that there were none. Perhaps an item would become available once he upgraded the system to the next level. Zhang Wei noticed Feng Xinyue's current state and gulped, feeling a mouthful of saliva in his mouth. He moved his hands through her silver hair, feeling its smoothness. Her eyes seemed to be carved by the gods themselves. "You won't open it?" he asked once again, but Feng Xinyue only blinked in response. Sensing her ignorance, Zhang Wei grew irritated. He moved his hand towards his pants and took them off, throwing away his undergarments. "You brought this upon yourself, little princess." He lifted her petite body up with his hands and sat on the sofa while making her sit on top of him. Feng Xingyue flinched as she felt something hot and big hitting against her body. She instinctively reached out and grabbed it with her small hand. Zhang Wei groaned in pleasure, feeling a soft touch on his manhood. His breathing became rough due to the unexpected attack. "Brother, what is this?" Feng Xingyue asked curiously with a hint of fear in her eyes. The object in front of her was too large to be held by her hand, making her feel worried and scared. She gently traced her fingers above his manhood, making Zhang Wei tremble in pleasure. He couldn't help but wonder what would happen if he had sex with her, if her hands alone were so pleasurable. Unconsciously, her face started to redden, and she began to feel hot sensations all over her body, which were both comfortable and pleasurable. Zhang Wei chuckled at her innocent question and reassured her, "Don't worry, you will soon learn what it is." Feng Xingyue nodded in response. Zhang Wei could tell that Feng Xingyue was in a defensive state against everyone, except with him. She operated with a trust or distrust mentality, with no middle ground. As for why she trusted him, Zhang Wei didn't care. Since she trusted him, he felt that he should take advantage of it. Mission. Teach Feng Xingyue a lesson. Description. The villain should not be underestimated or trifled with. Teach the celestial princess a lesson while she is helpless and earn villain points along with a thunder-based technique. Rewards. The host can earn 100.2000 villain points, and the more evil actions they perform, the more villain points they will receive. Zhang Wei's eyes shone with imaginary stars as he looked at his little villain points extractor sitting in his lap. "System, did you issue this mission?" he asked to confirm. "I didn't initiate it. I can issue quests in exceptional circumstances, but mostly the quests are issued randomly." "Good," Zhang Wei nodded, not wanting the system to have control over his choices. The best part was that there was no penalty attached to it. His eyes lingered on the red lips of Feng Xingyue. Zhang Wei was never one to have morals, and knowing that this Nizi was old enough to be called his ancestor, he did not hesitate to lean his head and cover her small lips with his. Feng Xingyue was stunned by his action and tried to struggle free, but her strength was not enough. Zhang Wei felt a jolt of electricity run down his body, and a sweet lingering smell entered his nostrils, making his lust skyrocket. His little brother started screaming as blood rushed to it with full might. Zhang Wei noticed Feng Xingyue's eyes staring at him with confusion and resentment, but there was no fear or anger. She only looked angry because Zhang Wei was forcing her to do something she did not want to do. However, her hands betrayed her looks, and climbed above his chest. Feng Xingyue's lips were extremely soft, so Zhang Wei stuck out his tongue and started licking her delicate lips. He tasted a sweet flavor that assaulted his taste buds, making him even more excited. Feng Xingyue struggled and moved her body to get away. "Pa!" Zhang Wei suddenly slapped her bottom and glared at her. "Stay like this," he commanded. "Humph." Feng Xingyue pouted her mouth in anger and looked away. What happened to her? Where did all her fear go? Zhang Wei felt bewildered by her attitude. Shouldn't this girl feel scared of him and follow him? Why is she trying to revolt? "Host, she earlier felt scared seeing you, as she thought she might have done something to make you furious. But now, you are pushing her to do something that makes her feel uncomfortable, so she is only angry but not scared by your glare." In simple words, she doesn't want to make Zhang Wei mad, but that's limited to when he's not pushing her against her will. She was behaving like a child, not wanting to make her parents mad, but rebelling when forced to do something she doesn't want to do. Understanding her psychology, Zhang Wei found it easy to comprehend her actions. Regardless, even if she was going to rebel, he wasn't going to change his mind at all. He caught her chin and forced her to look at him, then kissed her rosy lips again. With a fierce grip, he grabbed her delicate chin and tilted her face towards his, locking his eyes onto hers. She tried to pull away, but his grip was too strong. He leaned in, his hot breath against her skin, and crushed his lips against hers. The taste of her sweet, rosy lips sent shivers down his spine, and he deepened the kiss, unable to resist the intoxicating sensation. Out of suffocation, she separated her lips, only to allow Zhang Wei's tongue to enter her mouth. Her cheeks started to turn red as he explored every corner of her mouth with his tongue. Zhang Wei was having a mental breakdown. Despite having an intimate relationship with so many women, the feeling of Feng Xinyue's mouth was something else. He felt like he could eat her like this forever. Zhang Wei struggled to keep his composure, his mind reeling from the overwhelming allure of the woman before him. If not for his practice with the elemental harmony technique, he would surely have succumbed to her charms and lost himself completely. With trembling hands, he explored her body, tracing his fingers along her back and waist. But it was her perfectly sculpted rear that drew his attention, and he couldn't resist the urge to grab it firmly in his hands and give it a good squeeze. The sensation was indescribable. Soft yet firm, tight yet yielding. Zhang Wei was lost in a haze of desire, barely able to contain himself. A sweet, muffled moan escaped from Feng Xinyue's lips, sending a shiver down Zhang Wei's spine. It was the sweetest sound he had ever heard, and it made his heart race with anticipation. As he reached out to touch her, he was struck by the softness of her skin. He thought nothing could be softer, until his hands finally landed on her breasts. They were like pillows, and he couldn't resist the urge to squeeze them gently. In that moment, he knew he was in heaven, and he never wanted to leave. In the end, if the world burn, let it burn ideology took over, and he pressed his hand against her breast. Though there was a thin layer of clothing separating them, it didn't stop Zhang Wei from experiencing heavenly pleasure. Instantly lost by the pleasure, he shoved Feng Xinyue onto the sofa and climbed on top of her, devouring her lips with reckless abandon. The taste of her was intoxicating, and he couldn't get enough. Their bodies entwined, and he felt like he was on fire, consumed by desire. Chapter 25. Educating the Celestial Princess. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Feng Xinyue was completely caught off guard when Zhang Wei's pushed her down and his lips crashed onto hers, his passion overwhelming her senses. For a moment, she was paralyzed, unable to move as he continued to devour her lips with fervor. Her hands instinctively wrapped around his back, pulling him closer as she lost herself in the kiss. As he moved to her neck, the sweet scent of her perfume mixed with the honey-like taste of her skin, driving him wild with desire. Zhang Wei's hands roamed her body, exploring every curve as he indulged in the pleasure of her touch. Feng Xinyue's body responded to his every touch, her legs wrapping around him as she moaned in pleasure. Despite her initial shock, Feng Xinyue found herself completely aroused by Zhang Wei's advances. Her body was alive with sensation, every touch and kiss sending shivers down her spine. She tilted her head to the side, giving him better access to her neck as she breathed heavily, lost in the moment. For Feng Xinyue, the experience was both exhilarating and terrifying. Her body was reacting without her will, every touch and kiss taking her closer to the edge of pleasure. Feng Xinyue felt as though her body was no longer her own, as if it was possessed by a demon. The little girl was terrified by the loss of control, but her mind was so clouded by desire that she could think of nothing else. Unbeknownst to Zhang Wei, his cultivation was rising at a rapid speed. He had already broken through to the peak of the Qi-gathering realm after this short amount of time. The system had apparently not warned him about this. Feng Xinyue was like a bottomless pit, with boundless energy trapped inside her body. For mortals like Zhang Wei, even a drop of her saliva was enough to level up. If Zhang Wei were to take her virginity, he might as well explode from the excessive energy rushing into his body at once. The amount of energy would be enough to make him transcend and reach the peak of cultivation, becoming a divine immortal all at once. But unfortunately, he would never live to see that day. Just as Zhang Wei felt like he was losing himself to lust, he attempted to remove her clothes once again, failing yet another time. The desire was too strong, and he couldn't resist the urge to take her. But with every attempt, he was met with failure. It was as if fate was intervening to protect them both from the explosive power that lay within her. Zhang Wei's eyes fixed on Feng Xinyue as he commanded her, "Remove your clothes," he spoke with urgency, throwing away his own remaining clothes. Feng Xinyue, still gasping for air, felt a sudden wave of discomfort wash over her. She couldn't help but show a troubled expression as she struggled to catch her breath. Even the little celestial princess felt the same discomfort as Zhang Wei. Her body was racked with an unfamiliar sensation, and she too was desperate to rid herself of her clothes. But she didn't know how to do it. She looked at Zhang Wei with misty eyes and shook her head. I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own gasping breaths. She clenched her own small hands into fists at her own helplessness. Zhang Wei's fury was ignited by her response. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could she not know how to remove her clothes? Was she really that ignorant? "What do you mean you don't know?" he bellowed, his voice echoing throughout the room. Feng Xinyue flinched at the sound of his voice, shrinking in fear. She knew she had angered him. Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes, and she struggled to hold back a sob. She had never felt so helpless before. Zhang Wei, finally calming down, muttered to himself as he cursed the designer of the dress that had caused so much trouble. "Damn it! Curse the creator of this dress," he growled, his eyes flashing with anger. "What kind of fool would design something like this? A person who can design such a vicious dress deserves to die a dog's death," Zhang Wei growled, his anger still boiling inside him. His gaze swept across the room, taking in the sight of his crying little brother and the trembling figure of Feng Xinyue. It was clear who had won the race between them. Zhang Wei cared far more about his little brother than Feng Xinyue. Without a second thought, Zhang Wei lifted Feng Xinyue into his arms and gently placed her on the ground. She looked up at him with hazy eyes, too scared to anger him any further. She averted her gaze, staring at the floor instead of meeting his eyes. Even with her limited experience, she knew that this situation was not normal. Zhang Wei's actions had made it clear that removing Feng Xinyue's clothes was not an option. The system may not have been worried about Zhang Wei's safety from the very beginning, because it knew of this already, but in this moment, Feng Xinyue felt trapped and vulnerable. Feng Xinyue had never experienced the sensation of peeling off her clothes layer by layer, as the need had simply never arisen. The day she appeared in this unfamiliar world, she had awoken with no memories of where she had come from or who she was. The initial shock of being surrounded by strange people caused her to tremble with fear, and she closed her eyes tightly in an attempt to block out the unfamiliar faces. But as she opened them again, the people had vanished into thin air, as if never existing at all. Unbeknownst to her, her powers had leaked out for a moment, vaporizing those who had approached her. The will of this world probably took care of mess she was leaving behind, and even if someone managed to spot Feng Xinyue due to the spell casted on her by herself, people would forget her appearance soon enough. Since that day, Feng Xinyue had developed a deep-seated fear of contact with others, choosing to travel barefoot and alone, avoiding human interaction whenever possible. Her powers, while a great strength, had become a burden that isolated her from the world around her. As a cultivator, she could digest all of her food, never having to worry about the discomforts that plagued mere humans. And her dress, made of a special fiber enhanced by a layer of techniques, was impervious to dirt and wear, never needing to be washed or changed. Thus, she had worn the same garment since the day she had first appeared in this lower world, a constant reminder of her isolation and loneliness. When she first spotted Zhang Wei, she instinctively knew she could trust him, and an unfamiliar feeling told her that he was the reason she had appeared in this world. Zhang Wei had no interest in knowing Feng Xinyue's story, nor did he care to hear it. Instead, he grabbed her head firmly and lifted it upwards, making her meet his gaze. With a forced smile, he spoke, "Open your mouth and stick out your tongue." "Ha!" Feng Xinyue was taken aback by his sudden request, but she didn't want to provoke him any further, so she quickly complied. Without answering, Zhang Wei nodded in satisfaction as Feng Xinyue obediently opened her mouth wide and stuck out her tongue. Suddenly, her face was engulfed by the shadow of an awakened dragon, causing her to instinctively recoil in fear. That's scary," she stammered, shaken by the unexpected display of power. Pointing to Zhang Wei's throbbing member, which was hovering right in front of her face, she spoke. Zhang Wei had no intention of dealing with this little girl any longer. He grabbed her head and forced her to lean forward until her tongue touched the top of his rod. Feng Xinyue's eyes widened as she saw the intimidating size of the object in front of her. Her face grew hot, and she felt an overwhelming sense of embarrassment. Of course, she didn't understand these feelings, being so young and inexperienced. If the celestial beings were to discover that their beloved princess was being forced to give a blowjob to Zhang Wei, they might as well drink rat poison and commit suicide. Zhang Wei didn't care about her status at the moment. He narrowed his eyes and ordered her, "Lick it." Upon hearing his words, Feng Xinyue felt as if she was about to faint. Get close to that intimidating object. The mere thought of it was enough to send shivers down her spine. But as she heard the urgency and seriousness in Zhang Wei's voice, she knew she had to push through her fear. With quivering lips, she slowly stuck out her cute tongue and gingerly touched the tip of his manhood. As if triggered by her touch, she extended her small hands and wrapped both of them around the shaft of his member. Zhang Wei was taken aback, his soul seemingly floating out of his body as he looked down in surprise. There she was, holding his member with both hands as she licked the top. The sensation was heavenly, and he couldn't help but grab her head and urge her to continue. Feng Xinyue, seeming to comprehend, slowly slid her tongue down his shaft, her movements sending shivers of pleasure through Zhang Wei's body. Suddenly, something unexpected occurred. Without any guidance from Zhang Wei, she ventured further down and began lavishing attention on his testicles, causing him to moan with ecstasy. The only thing keeping Zhang Wei from reaching his climax was his overwhelming desire to feel the tight embrace of her mouth around him. "Open your mouth and take it in," he said, knowing that even with his enhanced stamina, he couldn't hold out much longer. Feng Xinyue's expression turned to one of fear as she hesitated, unsure of what to do next. "How do I do it?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "How is she supposed to put that thing in? Her mouth is too small for it." "Eh." Feng Xinyue gasped as she struggled to accommodate the monstrous beast, her small mouth opened as wide as possible, but it was no match for the 10-inch length that threatened to suffocate her. Zhang Wei had enhanced his body to diamond type, and his manhood had grown in size accordingly. It was now 10 inches long and thick enough to make even a grown woman choke. But he wasn't going to take no for an answer. He began to force his way inside Feng Xinyue, reckless of the potential injury he might cause her. To his surprise, Feng Xinyue's body seemed to self-heal wherever he broke the skin. He sighed in relief and pushed further inside her mouth, eliciting a wide-eyed gasp from the inexperienced girl. Her mouth was now full of his dick, leaving her unable to utter a single word. In no time, her body adjusted on its own, and she stopped feeling uncomfortable. She was surprised by how quickly she had adapted and glanced upwards, only to hear him say, "Move." She took it as an instruction and obediently moved her head up and down. Zhang Wei let out a loud groan of pleasure as he felt his dick strike against the walls of her mouth. The way she moved her mouth was pure ecstasy, and he couldn't help but feel like this woman was meant to be fucked. Every inch of her body felt heavenly, and he couldn't resist the urge to moan in pleasure. As the movements became more refined, Zhang Wei found it hard to endure any longer. He couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride as he watched this beautiful girl suck on his dick like it was heaven sent. Slurp. Slurp. The sound of her slurping only added to his pleasure, and he knew he would never forget this moment. Feng Xinyue moved with the grace of a gazelle, her lithe body writhing with a feverish energy that seemed bottomless. As she worked her magic on Zhang Wei's manhood, her tongue flicked and twisted around it like a serpent, sending electric shocks of pleasure down his spine. He couldn't believe this innocent-looking girl was capable of such mind-blowing feats. To his surprise, Feng Xinyue seemed to be enjoying herself just as much. What had started out as a scary experience had quickly transformed into a game for her. She was like a child playing with a new toy, eager to explore every nook and cranny. Zhang Wei struggled to keep up with her relentless pace, but his body was no match for her endless reserves of energy. Soon, he felt his members start to throb with an intensity that threatened to overwhelm him. With a groan, he pushed Feng Xinyue away, leaving her pouting like a child who had lost her candy. But her expression soon changed when she realized what had happened. Her face was covered in a sticky white liquid, and she looked at it with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Without thinking, she scooped some up with her finger and brought it to her lips. "Can I eat it?" she asked, her eyes shining with hope. Zhang Wei was speechless. He had just sprayed her face with his semen, and now she wanted to eat it. It was all too much for him to handle. But he nodded anyway, unable to deny her anything in that moment. Feng Xinyue was ecstatic to see Zhang Wei's approval and couldn't help but open her luscious lips to reveal her tongue slowly moving towards her finger. She seductively licked it, sending a shiver down Zhang Wei's spine. But the pleasure soon turned into frustration as he realized that he couldn't control the primal urge that was once again raging within him. Fuck! He cursed, feeling helpless and alone in his lustful desires. Meanwhile, Feng Xinyue had covered both her hands with the slimy liquid, enjoying every lick like a puppy. Zhang Wei was taken aback by her appearance, unsure of what to make of this innocent yet provocative sight. As he watched her, he couldn't help but wonder how she would react if she suddenly regained her memories. Would she still behave like this, or would she be shocked and horrified at her actions? Mission completed. Reward: 1000 villain points and a thunder-based technique. Check the inventory for it. Villain available points: 1000 Zhang Wei was taken aback by the reward he received for completing the mission. He had expected to receive the maximum points of 2000, but he was only given 1000. He couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment, knowing that he could have easily earned a perfect score if he had just beaten and physically tortured up the little girl in front of him. However, despite his villainous nature, Zhang Wei couldn't bring himself to harm the source of his heavenly pleasure for a mere 1000 points. He knew that there were other ways to earn points and he didn't want to risk losing the one person who brought him so much pleasure. With a sigh, Zhang Wei decided to set the mission aside and concentrate on finding alternative methods to calm his raging dragon. Note: Zhang Wei hitting Feng Xinyue would be out of character for him, so I did not include that scene. It would also seem redundant and forced. Whether you agree with my decision or not, feel free to comment. I would adjust the story in future accordingly. Chapter 26. The Book of Designee. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Wei smiled wryly and glanced at the little Nizi in front of him. Her petite frame was a testament to the fact that she was quite young, yet she had managed to lick herself clean, which was quite a feat. As he looked at her, he couldn't help but notice that there wasn't even a trace of filth on her dress. This made him sigh in relief, but as he went over her dress, his eyes stopped on the bump near her chest. It was then that he noticed her nipples were erect, and their outline was visible. However, that wasn't the thing that made his eyes halt there. Rather, it was the area near her nipples that was a bit wet. It was as if she was producing milk. The realization made his heart skip a beat. Is she a cow? Zhang Wei said, his voice laced with suspicion. He couldn't help but raise an eyebrow as he scanned her face again. Her beauty was almost too perfect, and he found it hard to believe that she was real. But as he looked closer, he realized that a cow could never be that gorgeous. The woman looked at him with confusion, wondering what had sparked his sudden outburst. He lifted her up once again and she gazed down at him, her eyes full of curiosity. Zhang Wei's eyes were glued to her ample breasts, and he couldn't help but gulp down a mouthful of saliva as his breathing grew shallow. He was entranced by her beauty, and his mind was flooded with images of what it would be like to explore every inch of her flawless body. He traced the curve of her waist with his fingertips, marveling at the softness of her skin. Her hair was silky and smooth, cascading down her back like a waterfall. Zhang Wei was completely lost in the moment, unable to resist the temptation to indulge in his desires. Unconsciously his mouth inched closer to her nipples. If this truly was her breast milk, the thought of it being the sweetest drink in the world crossed his mind. The scent of it filled his nostrils, and he could feel his taste buds tingling with anticipation. "It will kill you, host." The system hesitated to interrupt Zhang Wei's peaceful state, but it had no other option but to sound the alarm. The suddenness of the message left Zhang Wei startled, causing his brow to furrow in confusion. "Kill me? How is that possible?" he asked in disbelief. The system responded with a warning that sent chills down Zhang Wei's spine. "Your cultivation is already at the peak of the qi gathering realm, thanks to the yin energy you've unconsciously absorbed from Feng Xinyue, host. That small drop of milk you were going to consume has enough energy to catapult your cultivation several realms higher in a single blow. But beware, the power will be too much for your body to handle, causing it to explode like a balloon." Zhang Wei's eyes shot open as he felt a sudden surge of energy in his body. "Peak of qi gathering realm," he exclaimed in disbelief. He turned to Feng Xinyue, his heart racing with excitement. Could he use her as a cultivation furnace? But then thought of his own demise loomed over him. Using her to mate would result in his sudden death. In the end another question made him very curious. Not being able to contain himself, he asked the system. The system's voice explained. "Don't weigh celestial beings with mortal rules, host." She was feeling excessive arousal, unable to control the state of her own body. She might have started lactating. Zhang Wei was dumbfounded. So Feng Xinyue produced breast milk. As he pondered, a chilling realization dawned on him. Does that mean she still has cultivation in her body? If she leaks it by mistake, I could be erased from this world without a trace. He laughed at himself, but the thought of such a gruesome death sent shivers down his spine. Imagine bullying a defenseless child, only to suddenly drop dead without any understanding of what killed you. As the situation escalated, system explained further. Feng Xinyue can still unleash her powers in self-defense. How else could she have survived this long? Despite the world limiting her abilities, her cultivation has remained intact. Zhang Wei's demeanor shifted as he became wary of Feng Xinyue. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier, system? Were you trying to get me killed?" He had been tormenting this girl for far too long, thinking she was powerless. But she was always a ticking time bomb, waiting for the right moment to defend herself. What kind of system endangers its own host like this? It was a reckless and dangerous behavior that could have easily ended in tragedy. The system remained silent, unsure of how to put its words together. Eventually, it divulged the key information without providing any details. Knowing that Feng Xinyue posed no threat to the host, there was no need to reveal the information. Zhang Wei breathed a sigh of relief, grateful that he wouldn't accidentally get vaporized. He didn't know why the information was withheld, but he didn't dwell on it. Was it related to her unhealthy attachment to him? However, his relief soon turned to frustration as he realized that even if he managed to remove her dress, he wouldn't be able to do anything else. What was the point of such a tease? He couldn't help but wonder why the system was taunting him with food that he couldn't eat. If the system was a person, he would have beaten them to death for the torture they were putting him through. Why get his hopes up if he couldn't have her? As Zhang Wei gazed at the shimmering droplet of liquid, his mind was flooded with a plethora of thoughts. He pondered his existence, and in that moment, his mood soured. He couldn't help but feel as though he was trapped in a never-ending cycle of misfortune. Every time he was on the cusp of achieving something great, fate would pull the rug from under him, leaving him in a state of misery. He felt like a mere shell of a man, existing solely to manipulate and deceive others without any real purpose. And now, just when he thought he had finally found a way to achieve immortality and live a life of endless luxury, fate had once again intervened. Zhang Wei shook his head and let out a bitter laugh, mocking his wretched existence. He thought back to his tragic past, where his mother died just a few years after his birth, and he was forced to kill his own father. He fled his hometown and wound up living like a dog in the city for years. Even when he found happiness with Yu Lei, fate still found a way to shatter his contentment when Yu became pregnant, almost ruining his life entirely. Zhang Wei had had enough of this life. If the heavens wanted him dead, then he would die in style. He had already lived a full life, and with a self-deprecating smile, he moved closer to her breasts. "Don't do it, host," the system screamed in horror, as Zhang Wei's lips brushed against Feng Xinyue's exposed nipple. The system couldn't believe what it was witnessing, and it was bewildered by Zhang Wei's reckless behavior. "What are you doing, host? Are you trying to kill yourself?" The system's screams fell on deaf ears as Zhang Wei continued to savor the sensation of her nipple. Despite the thin layer of clothing, he felt his entire body melting with pleasure. Feng Xinyue started to moan as she wrapped her hands around his neck, pulling him closer to her chest. Zhang Wei was intoxicated by the sweet scent of her body, a heady mix of her skin and the milk she produced. He couldn't resist any longer, and he took her nipple into his mouth, savoring the taste of her milk. He sucked greedily, his hands roaming over her body, exploring every curve and every inch of her skin. Feng Xinyue's moans turned into gasps as she arched her back, offering herself to him completely. Zhang Wei felt like he was in heaven, and he didn't want this moment to end. He wanted to stay there forever, lost in the pleasure of her body. But he knew that this moment couldn't last forever, and eventually, he had to pull away. He looked up at Feng Xinyue's flushed face, her eyes glazed with desire, and he knew that he had to make her his. Zhang Wei's gaze was hungry as he once again gazed at Feng Xinyue's nipple. Calming himself, he took it into his mouth, and sucked greedily, a few drops of liquid spilled into his mouth. The taste was indescribable, and he couldn't find the words to express how it made him feel. It was more intoxicating than the most expensive wine he had ever tasted. For a moment, he thought that he would rather die than to live without this sweet milk. But then, a conflicted thought occurred to him. He wanted to live so that he could have this every day. As he savored the taste and the sensation of her milk on his tongue, he knew that it was already too late. He was addicted, and he couldn't imagine his life without it. He continued to suckle greedily, his hands roaming over her body, exploring every inch of her silky skin. Feng Xinyue's moans filled the room, and he knew that he was bringing her to the brink of pleasure. He wanted to stay there forever, lost in the ecstasy of her body. As he looked up at her flushed face, he knew that he had to have her. He wanted to make her his, whether with or without force, and nothing can stop him to do so. Suddenly he started feeling something strange in his body, but it was too late to turn back now. The drops of milk trickled down his neck, each one pulsing with a powerful energy that rushed towards his dantian. Zhang Wei watched in awe as the energy filled every crevice and corner of his core, expanding until it consumed every inch of space. As the energy reached its maximum capacity, his body erupted in a blinding, white light that illuminated the entire room. Feng Xinyue shielded her eyes from the brilliance, unable to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the energy that coursed through Zhang Wei's veins. Without warning, his body lifted off the ground, suspended in mid-air as the energy surged through his meridians. The overload caused an indescribable pain to rip through him, screaming in agony as his eyes bulged out of their sockets. "Ugh," he groaned, his body writhing and twisting in pain. But even through the agony, he knew that this was only the beginning. The power that he had just absorbed was beyond anything he had ever experienced, and he had no idea what it would do to him. Zhang Wei gritted his teeth to hide the excruciating pain, but as the pain reached unbearable levels, he couldn't hold back any longer. He opened his mouth and screamed like a madman, his voice echoing throughout the room. Ah! Feng Xingyue was panicked, frantically searching for him. Brother, she cried out, her eyes filled with fear. But she couldn't see anything, as the entire room was engulfed in the blinding white light emanating from Zhang Wei's body. His veins bulged as he broke through multiple stages at once, but the power kept inflating, causing him to hear the sound of his veins getting punctured from the excessive pressure. Just when his body was about to reach the point of explosion, new, even more powerful light illuminated from his body. The light shot upwards like a pillar, piercing through the ceiling and into the sky. The spectacle continued on for what felt like an eternity, as the beam of light pierced through the heavens, revealing its divine existence to a multitude of powerful beings. With a steady motion, a small, weathered book emerged from Zhang Wei's soul, emanating an unheard of amount of divinity. Its ancient pages were inscribed with a text in an unknown language, which translated to a single word. Destiny. As the book opened, its pages began to flutter at an unimaginable speed. What had once appeared as a small tome now seemed never-ending, with pages stretching out before them as far as the eye could see. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the book came to a halt on a specific page. A ruin, etched in glowing green, floated out of the book and slowly made its way towards Zhang Wei's figure. It felt as though time had come to a standstill as the ruin imprinted itself inside his body, causing it to glow with an ethereal aura. As if sensing the completion of its task, the book closed itself once again and moved back towards Zhang Wei's body. The pillar of light that had previously illuminated the room subsided, leaving no trace of its existence. Gradually, the room returned to its former state, as if nothing had happened. It's important to clarify that, despite not having experienced the feeling of embarrassment before, Feng Xingyue found herself feeling embarrassed due to the presence of her adult self within her. This adult version of herself seemed to be observing everything from within, causing her to feel self-conscious and uneasy. It's worth noting that the adult Feng Xingyue now functions as a hidden observer, which is a concept explained in the neo-dissociation theory of hypnosis. This theory suggests that during hypnosis, the mind can dissociate into different parts, and one part can become an observer while another part experiences something. While the reference to the hidden observer may not have any direct relevance to the story, the author included it simply for its cool factor, as though the current state of Feng Xingyue reminded a certain lazy author of a forgotten theory, which he read long ago. Chapter 27. Rome Meili. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Rome Meili sat alone, enveloped in a deafening silence, as she watched some dramas on her TV. The only sound was the faint murmurs of the actors on screen. Suddenly, she heard a blood-curdling scream coming from her neighbor's apartment. Her heart skipped a beat, and she felt a chill run down her spine. She knitted her brows, but she didn't get up to investigate the noise. She knew it wasn't her problem, and she didn't want to get involved. She sank deeper into the couch, her long legs stretched out in front of her. Her hair was messily tied up in a bun, and her face was devoid of any makeup. Rome Meili was dressed in a baggy t-shirt and shorts, making her look like she had just rolled out of bed. She felt a deep sense of sadness and emptiness that she could not shake off. As she lay there on the sofa, Rome Meili couldn't help but think about the upcoming movie shoot she had scheduled for today. She had been dreading it all week, and the thought of having to work with the director who had been causing her so much stress made her stomach turn. She felt trapped, like a bird in a cage, with no way out. She thought about all the times he had criticized her performance, and the way he had spoken to her in front of the rest of the crew. It was humiliating, and she couldn't stand the thought of having to go through it all again. She felt like a failure, like she wasn't good enough, and that she would never be able to meet his expectations. She reached for her phone and scrolled through her messages, hoping to find a way out of the shoot. But there was nothing there, no excuse she could use that wouldn't sound suspicious or unprofessional. She felt hopeless, like there was no escape from the agony of her life. She let out a heavy sigh and leaned her head back against the cushion. Maybe she could just call in sick, or pretend to have an emergency. But she knew that wouldn't solve anything in the long run. She was trapped in this endless cycle of pain and despair, with no end in sight. She was so lost in her thoughts that she barely noticed when the commotion outside her apartment stopped. It was only when her phone rang that she jolted back to reality, startled by the sudden noise. Her heart sank as she answered the call, knowing that it was just another reminder of the bleak reality of her life. Rome Maley answered the call, and it was her agent on the other end. The agent's voice was grating, and her words felt like a slap in the face. She listened to her tonight's arrangement, her heart sinking with each passing moment. The agent ended the call with a sickeningly sweet tone, leaving Rome Maley with an ugly expression on her face. She felt like a puppet, controlled by the fat pig of a director who had been hounding her for weeks. He had demanded her presence at a hotel, sending her the address as if she was nothing more than his plaything. Rome Maley had worked hard to get where she was, coming from a small town and working her way up to some casual dramas and shows. But soon, she had been met with the vicious plot of the entertainment industry. These bastards would let you shine, enjoy the stardom, get addicted to it, and right when you were starting to enjoy the life, they would stop giving you roles. It was a cruel world, where fame and fortune came at a steep price. Most civilians lived in an illusion of celebrities being independent, but that was true only for a very small substratum of that population. A large part of it still had to be affiliated with the media and production housing companies to get roles. Rome Maley felt trapped, like a bird with clipped wings. She knew that if she didn't show up to the hotel today she would be blacklisted from the industry. But if she did go, she would be at the mercy of the fat pig. It was a lose situation, and she felt like there was no way out. She was just another pawn in their game, a means to an end, and nothing more. The thought of it all made her feel sick to her stomach, and she couldn't shake off the overwhelming feeling of despair. Until few months ago, everything was going on fine, until Rome Maley's life had taken a turn for the worse. All of a sudden, she had stopped getting any roles, and her celebrity status had dwindled to nothing. She had always known that to be a celebrity, one must look wealthy, so she had bought all kinds of luxuries to maintain her status. However, in the end, she found herself drowning in debt. She was able to pay it off as long as she got roles, but when they stopped coming, she found herself one step closer to being declared insolvent. Trapped in this vicious ploy, Rome Maley had to surrender to fate and accommodate her media house's demands a few months ago. She thought sleeping with just one director would end the game, but it was only the beginning. From that day on, she was randomly called to serve rich guests, and she was paid handsomely for it. But the money was never enough to compensate for what she had to go through on a daily basis. Just like tonight, she had a shoot for a new drama, but right in the noon, she had to go and get fucked by God knows whom. Maybe it would be another fat pig. Maybe it would be a rich young master. Maybe it would be another business owner. She didn't know, and she didn't care anymore. She had lost all sense of dignity and self-worth. Right after going through such torment, she wouldn't get any rest and had to give her best during the filming of the drama. But even there, she would get scolded for committing mistakes from the director. Her life had turned into a never-ending cycle of pain and humiliation. This had been her life for the past few months, and she felt like it was better if she had never stepped into this circle. She was nothing more than a pawn, used and abused by those in power. She had lost all hope of ever escaping this hellish existence, and the only thing that kept her going was the thought of the money she made, which was the only thing that made her feel like she had some control over her life. Rome Maley was trapped in a never-ending cycle of debt and despair. She had bought an expensive apartment and car, and now she was drowning in debt. She couldn't leave her job, no matter how much she hated it, because she needed the money to pay off her debts. She was exposed to a lavish lifestyle, and she had become reluctant to part with it. The other crew members had started taking drugs to cope with the stress, and to act normally during filming. Rome Meili had even started considering doing the same. But she knew that there was no coming back from that path. She had seen what it had done to her colleagues, and she didn't want to end up like them. Faced with such a web of things, she couldn't help but laugh at her naive self of the past. She had been a wannabe rich city girl who had dreamt of appearing on the big screen. But now, she had become a shell of her former self. She had lost all hope of ever escaping this hellish existence, and the only thing that kept her going was the thought that maybe, just maybe, she could one day pay off her debts and start anew. But deep down, she knew that was just wishful thinking. She was stuck in this endless cycle of pain and suffering, with no way out. She felt like a prisoner, trapped in her own life. She had lost all sense of purpose and meaning, and she didn't know how to get it back. She had become numb to the world around her, and she felt like a ghost, haunting the halls of the film sets she was forced to work on. She wondered if this was all there was to life, if this was all she was meant to be. A broken, shattered soul, barely holding on to the threads of sanity. Rome Meili knew that she may become a popular celebrity in the future, but by the time she got there, she would be fully trained and numb to the feeling of being a white prostitute. The only reason she was feeling depressed now was because she was new to this industry. Right then, someone knocked on her door. Knock. Knock, Rome Meili snapped out of her thoughts and moved to open the door. The moment she opened it, she spotted a young girl with foreign features. Rome Meili felt that she was quite cute, but seeing the worried look on her face, she became anxious. "What's wrong?" Rome Meili asked with a frown, but the girl caught her hand and pulled her towards the neighbor's apartment straight in front of her. "Please help me wake up my brother," Feng Xinyue said while dragging Rome Meili along with her. The latter was surprised at how she was being dragged by a smaller person than her, but after listening to Feng Xinyue's words, her expression turned serious, and she followed after her. Rome Meili was neither a good nor a bad person. She was just a normal everyday girl who wanted to achieve her dreams. So, when faced with an emergency situation, she panicked but was ready to help. As they entered the neighbor's apartment, a sense of dread washed over Rome Meili. She could sense that something was terribly wrong. A/N. A wee lad waltzed up to a fortune teller and inquired about his destiny. "So, what's the scoop, oh wise and wrinkly one?" The seer cackled and retorted, "Well, let's just say the author who wrote this chapter is going to be hexed in the future." The little tyke was gobsmacked. "Wait, what author? I asked about my future, not some random scribbler's misfortune." Chapter 28. Acquired new skills. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As Zhang Wei opened his eyes, he surveyed his surroundings. The apartment was as he remembered it, but something was different. For a moment, he couldn't quite grasp what had happened. Then, it hit him. He was still in his physical form, alive and breathing. Not a single scratch or wound marred his body, both inside and out. His cultivation was still at peak of chi gathering realm, he realized in disbelief. "I am alive," he muttered, his voice trembling with uncertainty. He couldn't quite wrap his head around this miraculous turn of events. Suddenly, the system's voice interrupted his thoughts. It sounded irritated as it spoke, "Yes, host, you are alive. And please, for future reference, refrain from engaging in such suicidal acts." Zhang Wei heard the system's warning and let out a wry smile. After coming so close to death, he knew that he needed to reevaluate his life choices. The system was relieved to see Zhang Wei actually considering its word. It was about time he started taking his own life seriously. In that moment, Zhang Wei noticed that his status had improved. It was as though the brush with death had unlocked something within him. Status. Name. Zhang Wei. Age. 25. Body rank. Diamond body cultivation level. Peak stage of chi gathering realm bloodline. None spirit beast. None cultivation talent. Heavenly Talent Spiritual Root Rank. Heavenly Thunder Root, Heaven.Defying Spiritual Root. Techniques. 1. Elemental Harmony Technique. The Elemental Harmony Technique is a cultivation method that focuses on balancing the 5 elements within the body: earth, water, fire, wood, and metal. Grade. Unranked 2, Thunder God's Wrath. This technique would allow user to summon a powerful thunderstorm, which would rain down lightning bolts on his opponents. It would cause massive damage and stun anyone caught in its path. Additionally, the technique would provide user with a thunder affinity, enhancing his control over thunder-based techniques and increasing the power of his thunder attacks. Grade. Celestial 3, Yin Absorption Control. This skill would allow user to control the amount of Yin essence he absorbs during sexual intercourse. The user can set a limit to the amount of Yin energy he can absorb without causing harm to himself. Grade. Spiritual 4, Yin and Yang Balance. This skill would enable user to balance his Yin and Yang energies during intercourse. It would prevent user from absorbing too much Yin energy and maintain a healthy balance between the two. Grade. Spiritual 5, Yin Energy Conversation. This skill would enable user to convert the excess Yin energy he absorbs into Yang energy. This would help user to maintain a healthy balance of Yin and Yang energies in his body. Grade. Spiritual Note. The excess accumulated Yang essence in the user body can be exchanged for villain points. Available villain points: 1000 available excess Yang energy. 100,000 ET 100 Yang energy units equals 1 villain point. As Zhang's eyes lit up with his newfound skill, he felt a rush of excitement. He had surpassed mortal boundaries and had reached the new level. In this lower world, there was no higher level to comprehend beyond master level techniques, and right now he already had techniques that surpassed that level. He can't distinguish celestial level techniques from spiritual level techniques, as system gave no explanation to techniques beyond master level. However, he was intrigued by the possibility of celestial techniques surpassing spiritual ones. The descriptions of his new skills left him elated, and he forgot that he had died just a minute ago. Now, he felt invincible. He could even seduce the celestial princess and convert her Yin energy to Yang, earning him villain points in exchange. But he was warned by the system not to get too excited, as there would be consequences. The surplus of Yang energy in his body would heighten his libido, which could only be remedied through dual cultivation with women. Even if he tried to rid himself of the excess energy by converting it into villain points, the outcome would be the same. The system was incapable of fully neutralizing the effects of the excess energy within his body, leaving potential remnants behind even if it was isolated in a separate space. Zhang Wei nodded to system explanation, realizing that he would need some women to calm his little brother down. As he looked down, his little brother stood tall and proud like a fierce dragon. After attaining the power of a cultivator, Zhang Wei discovered he could sterilize his essence, ensuring he wouldn't be burdened with an unwanted pregnancy in the future. Zhang Wei was itching to unleash his newfound thunder powers, but he needed a woman to ravish first. Unfortunately, the system had not equipped him with the ability to strip a woman naked. How did I obtain these other skills? I thought I was only rewarded with the thunder technique, Zhang Wei inquired. The host acquired those skills through his own acts of valor, came the system's sarcastic reply. Amused by the system's snarky tone, Zhang Wei chuckled softly. He knew that the system had given him those additional skills to save his life. But there was something strangely satisfying about aggravating the system, or whoever the owner of that sultry female voice may be. Zhang Wei let out a deep sigh, his thoughts now consumed by a more pressing matter. His little brother. He had to calm it down. There was no way he could go out in this state. He needed to call Yulei back home, even if it meant dealing with her irritation. As he reached for his phone, he noticed something strange. The little Nizi was nowhere to be found. Where did she disappear to? He muttered, searching the entire apartment to no avail. Just as he was about to consult the system again, he heard voices approaching. He turned towards the door and his eyes widened in surprise. Feng Xinyue was entering the apartment with a foreign woman, her long red hair flowing freely and dressed in loose clothing. Rome Meili, the foreign woman, was momentarily frozen in shock. The last thing she had expected to see today was her naked neighbor, flaunting his little brother in front of her. Wow, that's huge. Rome Meili blurted out without thinking, her eyes widening in shock. Zhang Wei chuckled, a hint of pride in his voice as he replied, "Thank you, I work hard to maintain my physique." Rome Meili's face turned beet red as she realized the unintended innuendo in her words. "I didn't mean it like that," she protested, but Zhang Wei just grinned knowingly. Meanwhile, Feng Xinyue had rushed over to him and wrapped her arms around his naked torso. Zhang Wei patted her back in gratitude, glad for her help. Rome Meili, however, was not amused. "You pervert," she scolded, pointing an accusing finger at Zhang Wei. "Put on some clothes or I'll call the police." Zhang Wei frowned, annoyed at the mortal woman's audacity. He may not be able to bend the laws of the land, but he certainly wasn't afraid to silence someone who posed a threat to him. Suddenly, a new plan formed in Zhang Wei's mind, and he sprang into action. He looked at Rome Meili and said, "What nonsense are you saying, lady? I am already married." His words made Rome Meili even more astounded. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. He married a minor. This man had the audacity to speak to her like this. Zhang Wei clarified, "No, not her. My wife is outside working. Do you have a problem with that?" Rome Meili's eyes widened in surprise. Then she asked, still unable to understand the relationship between Zhang Wei and Feng Xinyue. Zhang Wei sighed and explained, "She's my younger sister. I just got out of the shower and fainted. She may have gone out to get you for help." He considered telling her that Feng Xinyue was his daughter, but he knew that Rome Meili probably wouldn't believe it. If he told her that Feng Xinyue was adopted, her suspicions would only grow. His plan had worked. Rome Meili, her eyes still suspicious, had apologized for her misunderstanding. Zhang Wei felt a surge of satisfaction as he watched her struggle to initiate a handshake before finally realizing he wasn't wearing any clothes. "Never mind, can you wear some clothes please?" she stuttered, embarrassed. Zhang laughed, pointing at the door. "This is my home, Miss Rong. I have the right to walk around naked. It shouldn't be your concern." Even as he spoke, he began to dress himself, basking in the victory of having fooled his neighbor. But Rome Meili wasn't stupid. She saw through his mockery and quietly made her exit, closing the door behind her as she retreated back to her own apartment. "I don't want to involve myself in that mess anymore," she thought, frustrated. Her life was complicated enough without discovering that an incestuous couple lived next door. She was uncertain about the relationship between Feng Xinyue and Zhang Wei. It didn't seem pure to her. But she had bigger issues to deal with. She couldn't act solely on suspicions, nor was she a crusader for social justice. She had her own life and troubles to handle. Chapter 29. A Trapped Bird. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Wei hastily threw on his clothes, careful not to wrinkle them as he prepared to step out for a bit. He picked up the remote and flicked through the channels, hoping to find something that would amuse the little niece he was leaving behind. With a sigh of relief as she settled on a cartoon, he headed towards the door, a noticeable bulge in his pants that he tried to discreetly adjust. His little brother's insatiable hunger for feline flesh gnawed at him, and Zhang Wei knew exactly where to go to appease it. He made his way down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence, until he stood in front of the door of his front door neighbor. With a deep breath, he raised his hand and knocked firmly on the door, the sound reverberating through the hallway. He waited impatiently, his heart pounding in his chest, until the door creaked open to reveal Rome Meili's annoyed face. She peered out at him, her eyes narrowed in confusion, and he could sense her irritation. But Jiang Wei had a mission to complete, and he wasn't about to let her stand in his way. Jiang Wei plastered on his most charming grin and greeted Rome Meili with all the politeness he could muster. He desperately hoped that his charm would win her over. However, Rome Meili was no fool. She spoke bluntly, her voice laced with suspicion, "What do you want?" Ignoring her boundaries, Jiang Wei barged in, his eyes scanning her apartment. He spotted a camera mounted on a stand, and his curiosity piqued. "Are you an actor?" he asked, his eyes flickering with interest. Rome Meili was taken aback by his brazen behavior. She stuttered, Yes, but..." Before she could finish, she found her voice and snapped, "Get out right now. You can't just barge into my place like this." Jiang Wei, however, was not deterred by her hostility. He continued to snoop around her apartment, his eyes darting from one corner to another. Rome Meili glared at him, her fists clenching in anger. She couldn't believe that someone could be so brazen as to invade her privacy like this. "What are you looking for?" she demanded, her voice dripping with anger. Jiang Wei shrugged nonchalantly. "Just checking out the neighborhood," he said with a sly grin. Rome Meili gritted her teeth, feeling a wave of frustration wash over her. She had to get rid of this man, and fast. "Look, I don't know who you are, and I don't care," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "But you need to leave now. I have work to do." Jiang Wei ignored her and continued to poke around her apartment. He opened drawers, rifled through her closet, and even peeked into her bathroom. Finally, Rome Meili had had enough. She grabbed his arm and pulled him towards the door. "I said get out," she yelled, her face red with anger. Jiang Wei chuckled, his eyes twinkling with mischief. All right, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "No need to get so worked up." With a sly smirk on his face, Jiang Wei sauntered towards the door, his hand reaching for the handle. As he gripped it, his eyes flickered with a mischievous glint, and instead of leaving, he pulled the door shut and locked it from the inside. The satisfying click of the lock echoed through the room, sending shivers down Rome Meili's spine as she watched him with suspicion. Being a woman in the industry, Rome Meili knew better than to trust men like Jiang Wei. She'd seen firsthand the way they could manipulate and deceive, and the icy fear that gripped her heart was all too familiar. And yet, even as she backed away from him, she couldn't help but notice the way his eyes lingered on her, studying her with a predatory gaze. Jiang Wei's grin widened as he stepped closer, his eyes tracing the curves of her body with an appraising look. Rome Meili felt a jolt of fear run through her as she realized what he was thinking. She knew all too well the kind of men who would do anything to get what they wanted, and she wasn't about to become another victim. But even as she braced herself for the worst, Jiang Wei's words surprised her. "Look, I need someone to help me out," he said, his voice low and smooth. "Unfortunately, it appears that you are the only female around here." Rome Meili's heart raced as she realized what he was implying. She couldn't believe he would stoop so low as to use her in this way. But even as she tried to protest, Jiang Wei's gaze swept over her, taking in her beauty with a cold detachment. She saw the bulge in his pants and understood his intentions all too well. You're insane," she stammered, backing away from him in horror. She fumbled for her phone, desperate to call for help, but before she could even unlock it, Jiang Wei was upon her. With lightning speed, he snatched the phone from her hand and flung it across the room. Rome Meili gasped in shock as it clattered to the floor, shattering into a million pieces. She was trapped, alone with this man who had no qualms about using her for his own pleasure. "There's no need for another man, lady," Jiang Wei murmured, his voice honeyed and gentle. "I would be sufficient enough." With a sickening feeling in the pit of her stomach, Rome Meili watched as he set up a camera, his eyes gleaming with a twisted excitement. Rome Meili's heart was pounding in her chest, as if it was trying to escape her body. The hairs on her arms stood on end as she stared at Jiang Wei, her mind unable to process what was happening. The last thing she remembered was Zhang Wei standing 10 meters away from her, and now he was right in front of her, inspecting the camera with the intensity of a hawk eyeing its prey. "Does it have an SD card?" he asked in a low voice, his eyes flicking up to meet hers. Rome Meili couldn't help but feel a shiver run down her spine, as if she was staring into the eyes of a predator. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she responded, What will you do with it?" Her hands were trembling with fear as she backed away from him, her eyes darting around the room, searching for something. Anything that could help her escape. With a sudden burst of determination, Rome Meili's hand shot out towards a nearby vase. She grabbed it with both hands, her fingers gripping it tightly as she lifted it up, ready to strike. Her heart was racing, her breathing shallow as she prepared to defend herself. But before she could even take aim, Zhang Wei moved with a speed that defied human ability. Purple lightning crackled around him, illuminating the room with an eerie glow as he flicked his wrist and destroyed the vase with ease. Rome Meili's face drained of color as she stumbled backwards, her mind unable to comprehend what she had just witnessed. Ghost, she stammered, her voice trembling with fear. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. How could someone control lightning like that? As she stared at Zhang Wei, her mind racing with questions and fear, she realized one thing. She was in deep trouble. Zhang Wei couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as he watched Rome Meili shrink back in fear. He knew he had the upper hand, and it gave him a rush of adrenaline that he couldn't resist. With a flick of his wrist, he summoned another bolt of purple lightning, causing Rome Meili to jump back in surprise. He could see the fear in her eyes, and he relished in it. But as he stood there, his body radiating power and confidence, a part of him felt like a child again. He couldn't help but feel giddy with excitement at the thought of using his superhuman abilities to their full potential. It was like a dream come true. The ability to control lightning, to move with the speed of a cheetah, to have strength beyond that of any mortal man. Zhang Wei couldn't believe his luck, and he knew that he would make the most of these powers. As he watched Rome Meili tremble before him, he knew that he had the power to do anything he wanted. And with that realization, he couldn't help but grin with delight, like a child who had just been given the greatest gift in the world. The sound of the camera clicking on sent shivers down Rome Meili's spine as she knew that her worst nightmare was about to come true. Without a second thought, she bolted towards the balcony, hoping to escape the impending humiliation that awaited her. However, before she could even take a single step towards the edge, she felt a strong grip on her arm, pulling her back from the brink of disaster. "No," she screamed in fear, feeling a shock on her body and mind. The sudden jolt caused her to stumble, and she turned around to see Zhang Wei standing inches away from her. With fear she stammered out few words. Don't come near me." His eyes were fixed on her, and she could feel his hot breath on her face as he held her tightly in his grasp. Rome Meili's heart was pounding in her chest as she realized that she was completely at his mercy. She was nothing more than a helpless bird trapped in a predator's claws, and she knew that there was no escaping his clutches. As she stared into his cold, calculating eyes, Rome Meili felt a sense of dread wash over her. She knew that she was about to become a victim, and there was nothing she could do to stop him. As she stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, she couldn't help but wonder if this was truly the last thing she had to endure. She had journeyed all the way from her humble hometown, with dreams of a better life in the big city, only to be met with this nightmare. Zhang Wei, the man standing before her, seemed to revel in her fear and desperation. He didn't care about her at all. If anything, the thought of inflicting absolute evil upon her made him even more excited. His arousal was so intense that his already erect member strained against his pants, threatening to burst free at any moment. Zhang Wei would learn an important lesson from her. Blackmailing people is not as easy as it seems. This serves to establish that Zhang Wei is not a God-level manipulator from the start, and is capable of making mistakes. Chapter 30. Beautiful celebrity neighbor, you are listening at novelfull.audio. The key to writing a villain character is that you must feel it. The scream, the terror-ridden faces, and cries. All must be felt and enjoyed. Extreme content ahead, readers advised to be cautious, curse all you want this author for, because he is going to enjoy all of it, laughing at your misery like a true villain. In the tranquil haven of Southern Heights, where the wealthy elites sought refuge from the chaos of the city, a disturbance erupted from within one of the opulent apartments. Rome Meili cowered in terror as Zhang Wei's vice-like grip kept her captive, unable to escape his wrath. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stuttered, "Why are you doing this?" Zhang Wei's sinister grin sent shivers down her spine as he seized her chin. "Why? Because you're too weak, of course." The words reverberated through Rome Meili's mind like a never-ending echo, a brutal reminder of her perceived inadequacy. "I'm weak," she whispered to herself. Was that why she had succumbed to the whims of her media company, bending to their every command? Was that why the director felt entitled to abuse his power over her? The brutal truth of power hit Rome Meili like a ton of bricks, leaving her stunned and helpless. She didn't even realize when Zhang Wei's face drew closer to hers, and it was only when she felt something cold on her lips that she snapped out of her daze. Get away, she cried out, trying to push him off, but her futile attempts only made him push her further back until she was pressed against a soft cushion. Zhang Wei and Rome Meili crashed onto the large sofa, the impact knocking the breath out of both of them. Zhang Wei quickly regained his composure, using his brute strength to pin Rome Meili's body to the sofa. Rome Meili struggled to break free, but his grip was too strong. She felt completely helpless and vulnerable, trapped beneath him as he continued to ravage her body with a fierce hunger. Zhang Wei continued to ravish her lips, ignoring the beating of her fists on his back and the desperate struggles of her legs. Rome Meili's face showed nothing but despair and defeat as she realized the extent of her powerlessness in this situation. Rome Meili's mind raced in panic as she realized that she was trapped, with no way out of this situation. She tried to push Zhang Wei away with all her might, but he was too strong for her. His lips and hands roamed over her body, leaving her feeling violated and helpless. As Zhang Wei continued to ravish her lips and neck, Rome Meili's struggles intensified. She kicked and punched him, but he only laughed and tightened his grip on her. The thought of being overpowered and used against her made her heart race with fear and disgust. But despite her resistance, Zhang Wei showed no signs of stopping. He seemed to be enjoying her struggles, taking pleasure in her helplessness. He wasn't sure if it was due to the situation or Rome Meili herself, but he was experiencing a unique and delightful sensation from her skin. Every inch of her body, from her luscious lips to her slender figure, provided an unparalleled sensation that he had never experienced before. Suddenly, he released her from his grip and she attempted to scream out, "Hell you!" Little did she knew, that was precisely what he wanted. Seizing the moment, he passionately kissed her, exploring the depths of her mouth with his tongue. Rome Meili felt a wave of disgust wash over her, causing her to cry out in terror. In her desperation, she attempted to bite his tongue, prompting Zhang Wei to open his eyes and give her a menacing glare. "If you do that again, I will kill you," he threatened, his hand crackling with lightning. The woman was easily frightened, and she dared not bite him again as he continued to explore the inside of her mouth. When he finally released her, she gasped for air and broke down into sobs. Rome Meili had been strong for too long, and now she couldn't hold back her tears any longer. Zhang Wei ignored her cries as he sucked on her tongue, slowly removing her oversized white T-shirt with his other hand. The shirt slid down until it rested on her waist, exposing her breasts. She wasn't wearing a bra, making it easier for him to access them. Rome Meili continued to cry out in terror, her screams echoing through the room. Rome Meili's cries filled the room as Zhang Wei continued to explore her body. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to comprehend the situation she was in. "Please. Stop," she begged silently in her mind, but her words never left her lips. As Zhang Wei sucked on her breasts, she felt violated and disgusted. She couldn't believe that this was happening to her, and she wondered what she could have done to deserve such treatment. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the situation, but all she could feel was the overwhelming sense of fear and despair. She closed her eyes, hoping that it would all be over soon. But as Zhang Wei continued to ravage her body, Rong Meili's cries grew louder and more desperate. She felt helpless and alone, trapped in a nightmare that she couldn't escape from. Her body shook with sobs as the tears continued to fall, and she wondered if this was how her life would end. In that moment, all she could do was cry and hope that someone would hear her and come to her rescue. Zhang Wei's mouth hungrily suckled on Rong Meili's soft cherry nipples, causing her to cry out in pain and despair. Her body trembled as she begged him to stop, her sobs echoing through the room. As he continued to ravage her body, his hand moved down to her shorts, pulling them down with a swift motion. Rong Meili's panty needed to be torn away using his chi, leaving her feeling vulnerable and exposed. Please, sir. Sob, I beg you. Stop, Rong Meili whimpered, the tears running down her face. I'll do anything you want. Just please. Please let me go. But Zhang Wei didn't listen to her pleas. He continued to explore her body with an insatiable hunger, causing her to cry out in pain and terror. Please. I don't want this, she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. People love me. Please don't do this to me. Her words fell on deaf ears as Zhang Wei tore away her panties, leaving her completely exposed and vulnerable. Rong Meili felt a sense of despair wash over her as she realized that she was completely at his mercy. Please, sir, have mercy on me, she pleaded, her voice shaking with fear. I promise I won't tell anyone about this. Just please, let me go. But Zhang Wei remained silent as he continued to ravage her body, causing her to cry out in pain and despair. Rong Meili felt like she was trapped in a nightmare that she couldn't escape from, and she wondered if she would ever be free from this ordeal. The moment Zhang Wei's bare skin touched hers, Rong Meili let out a blood-curdling scream. She felt him pressing her against his naked body, but there was no time to appreciate his toned muscles as she saw something huge entering her most intimate area. Zhang Wei positioned his throbbing member at her tiny vaginal hole, and under Rong Meili's horrified gaze, he slammed his waist. Ah! She let out another scream that echoed through the room. Please stop. It hurts so much. I will give you money, no. I will give you anything, please stop. I beg you. Rong Meili begged, her voice shaking with pain and fear. Zhang Wei was surprised by her excessive reaction, but as he looked down, he saw blood dripping from her vagina. It wasn't because she was a virgin, but because his entry had been too sudden and forceful. Despite the agony-filled cries and pleas of Rong Meili, Zhang Wei ignored them and made a mental note to be more careful with Yu Lei. The size of his dragon has soared after assimilating the diamond body. With that in mind, he started to move his waist, with Rong Meili pinned down, her fists closed as she tried to endure the humiliation and trauma she had to go through. Maybe it was due to her fear, but Zhang Wei felt her insides very tight, the most narrow hole he had even been in, but that didn't discourage him as he immense amount of satisfaction, feeling her walls vaginal tightly suffocate his dick as he went in. He kept shaking his hips like a madman. Pa pa pa. The whole place was only filled by cries of Rong Meili and the sound of flesh clashing against each other. Rong Meili's screams intensified as Zhang Wei continued to pound into her. Tears streamed down her face as she begged him to stop. I can't take it anymore. It hurts. I'll do anything you want. Just please stop, she cried out, her voice hoarse from the pain. But Zhang Wei only seemed to get more aroused by her cries. He gripped her hips tightly and thrust harder, causing Rong Meili to scream even louder. Stop. Please. Stop, she wailed, the pain becoming unbearable. Her screams only fueled his arousal, and at last, Zhang Wei reached his climax, pouring his load inside of her. Rome Meili gasped as she felt the hot liquid filling her insides. Come inside, she asked, her eyes heavy with terror. But before she could react, another wave of pain and pleasure assaulted her as Zhang Wei went for another round. It felt like an eternal torture to Rome Meili, but after 2 hours of continuous, strenuous activity, it finally ended. By then, her eyes were half closed, and she had no strength left to scream or beg. All she wanted was for it to be over so that she could sleep, a deep slumber that she would never want to wake up from. Zhang Wei's back was covered in deep scratches, he could have avoided it, but he didn't mind. It felt better to let it be. He circulated the flow of qi and all the marks disappeared from his back. Zhang Wei felt being a cultivator have given him too many benefits. Now he don't have to wreck his brain, to think how to remove scratch or marks from his body. Nobody would even know, until he want them to. Once he was finished, he ignored Rome Meili's miserable state and put his clothes on. He finally felt as if he had taken his revenge, inflicting the same torment he had once suffered on someone else. It filled his heart with content. As he dressed himself, he couldn't help but feel stunned at how much his stamina had increased. It wasn't a bad thing for him, of course. With one last glance at Rome Meili, he moved to leave the room. Rome Meili saw his departing figure, and stammered out few words, wait. She had hoped that Zhang Wei would help her leave the industry, but her hopes were shattered when he took out the SD card and pocketed it. Don't tell anyone about this or it'll be all over the internet tomorrow, he warned before leaving, ignoring the disbelief and shock on her face. She had never expected him to be so heartless, but maybe it was the world that was heartless to her. After some time, she dragged her tired body to clean up and get ready for her next job. It was only 1 p.m., and the agreed upon time was 2 p.m. She couldn't afford to be late. Her whole body screamed in pain, but she somehow managed to walk. But as she tried to leave, she realized that her phone had been crushed by Zhang Wei. She didn't remember the address, and despair consumed her. She could have contacted the director with her laptop, but something inside her snapped. She decided to sit down and do nothing at all. Why bother trying anymore? Zhang Wei halted in the hallway, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. What should he do today? His body buzzed with an unusual vigor, thanks to the vanishing of the excess yang energy. Oddly enough, the system remained quiet as a mouse, which gave Zhang Wei pause. He shrugged it off, though. He held the SD card tightly, knowing Rome Meili wouldn't dare to pull any stunts with it in his possession. So, what to do now? Should he gather more intel on the Song family? Or perhaps go give that snobbish president of his wife's company a taste of her own medicine? He could always head back to the apartment and play with Feng Xingyue. Ultimately, Zhang Wei rejected all of his prior options and settled on something far more exciting. He chose to rendezvous with an old friend at a trendy bar nestled in the bustling waterfront district. This area was a hub for commerce, featuring a variety of charming cafes, delectable restaurants, and lively bars. But it was also notorious for its seedy underbelly, being a prime location for nefarious gangs to conduct their business, as it was located near the ports.